Martin Luther King Jr. By the late 1960s, Martin Luther King Jr. was one of the most well-known voices in the world. He had already led the Montgomery bus boycott, given the I Have a Dream speech, won the Nobel Peace Prize, and become the face of nonviolent resistance in America. But in his final years, he wasn't just focused on civil rights. He had also started criticizing the Vietnam War and pushing for economic justice, organizing a poor people's campaign that aimed to unite people across race lines to fight poverty. That shift made him even more controversial. On April 4, 1968, King was in Memphis, Tennessee. He had gone there to support striking sanitation workers who were demanding better pay and working conditions. That evening, he stepped out onto the balcony of the Lorraine Motel. At 6:01 p.m., a bullet hit him in the jaw and spine. He was rushed to the hospital but pronounced dead an hour later. James Earl Ray, a fugitive at the time, was arrested and charged with the murder. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 99 years in prison, but later tried to recant his confession. Over the years, several investigations were launched, including one by the US government, and while conspiracy theories still exist, the official story is that Ray acted alone. Mahatma Gandhi. He led India's independence movement against British colonial rule, not with weapons, but with protests, hunger strikes, and civil disobedience. As a result, Gandhi became a global symbol of peaceful resistance. But after India finally gained independence in 1947, the country was quickly divided, literally. The partition created two nations, India and Pakistan. The split sparked massive violence between Hindus and Muslims. Gandhi, a Hindu himself, opposed the violence and called for peace between the communities. Not everyone agreed with him. On January 30th, 1948, Gandhi was walking to a prayer meeting in New Delhi when a man stepped out of the crowd and shot him 3 times in the chest at point-blank range. The man was Nathuram Godse, a Hindu nationalist who believed Gandhi was being too soft on Muslims and had betrayed India by promoting harmony with Pakistan. Godse was arrested on the spot, tried, and later executed. Gandhi's death shocked the world. He had led 2 entire nations to freedom without firing a bullet, and in the end he was killed by someone from the very community he belonged to. Che Guevara. He was a revolutionary guerrilla leader and one of the most polarizing figures in modern history. After helping lead the Cuban Revolution alongside Fidel Castro, Che didn't settle into retirement. He saw revolution as a global duty. In the mid-1960s, he disappeared from public life and eventually turned up in Bolivia, hoping to ignite another uprising against imperialism and capitalism. But things didn't go as planned. The local population didn't support him. The Bolivian army, with help from the CIA, tracked down his small guerrilla force. On October 8, 1967, Che was captured in the jungle after a firefight. The Bolivian government claimed he was shot in battle. He wasn't. He was tied up, unarmed, and then shot multiple times in the legs and chest to make it look like a combat death. Before he was killed, Che reportedly said to the executioner, "Shoot, coward. You are only going to kill a man." His body was displayed to the public, photographed to prove he was dead. Then it disappeared. It wasn't until 1997 that his remains were found and returned to Cuba, where he was buried with full honors. Some remember him as a freedom fighter, others as a violent extremist. Rachel Corrie. In early 2003, this young woman traveled to the Gaza Strip as part of the International Solidarity Movement, a group that used peaceful protest to stand against the Israeli military's demolition of Palestinian homes. On March 16, 2003, Rachel was acting as a human shield, standing in front of a Palestinian home in Rafah to try and stop it from being destroyed. She was wearing a high-visibility vest and using a megaphone to make herself seen and heard. But the bulldozer didn't stop. It ran over her once, then reversed, running her over again. She suffered catastrophic injuries and died shortly after. The Israeli military claimed it was an accident. They said the driver never saw her, but multiple eyewitnesses and human rights groups argued otherwise. When the family filed a civil suit, the judge said the event took place during a wartime activity, which legally protected the army. Malcolm X. Malcolm X's path as an activist was very different from King's. He was a fierce critic of white supremacy, an advocate for black self-defense, and also spokesman for the Nation of Islam. Malcolm became a powerful voice in the civil rights movement, but also a deeply controversial one. In 1964, Malcolm split from the Nation of Islam after internal disagreements and personal tensions with its leader, Elijah Muhammad. He started his own group, the Organization of Afro-American Unity, and began broadening his message. He traveled to Africa and the Middle East, rethinking some of his earlier beliefs, but that shift also made him more vulnerable. He now had enemies in the Nation of Islam, and he was being watched closely by the FBI. On February 21st, 1965, Malcolm X was preparing to speak at the Audubon Ballroom in New York City. A disturbance in the audience drew his attention, and in that moment 3 gunmen rushed the stage. Malcolm was shot 21 times. He died at the scene. 3 members of the Nation of Islam were arrested and convicted for the murder. Decades later, 2 of them were exonerated after new evidence suggested they weren't involved. To this day, the full truth about who ordered or carried out the killing remains unclear. Sophie Scholl. Sophie Scholl was just a student, 21 years old, and a member of the White Rose, a non-violent resistance group in Nazi Germany. Armed with only a typewriter and some paper, Sophie and her brother Hans printed leaflets that criticized the Nazi regime and called for passive resistance. They weren't secret agents. They were students, using logic and moral courage in a place where both were running low. Then, on February 18th, 1943, Sophie and Hans brought a stack of leaflets to the University of Munich. While classes were in session, they scattered them around the atrium for students to find. Sophie even pushed a stack off a balcony, letting them rain down into the empty hall below. The university janitor, a loyal Nazi supporter, reported them to the Gestapo. They were arrested on the spot, interrogated for days, and put on trial on February 22nd. The trial lasted only a few hours, and the sentence was death. That same day, just a few hours after the verdict, Sophie, Hans, and their friend Christoph Probst were executed by guillotine. Sophie's last words were recorded by her prison guard. She said, "Such a fine, sunny day, and I have to go. What does my death matter if through us thousands of people are awakened and stirred to action?" Today, schools, streets, and statues across Germany bear her name. Her story is taught to students who live in the very country that once executed her. Fred Hampton. Fred Hampton was a rising star in the civil rights movement and the deputy chairman of the Black Panther Party in Illinois. He had the ability to unite groups across racial and economic lines, and that made him a high-priority target for the people in power, and especially the FBI. They labeled him a threat under COINTELPRO, a secret surveillance program aimed at dismantling political organizations they considered subversive. Eventually, an informant inside the Panthers gave the FBI a detailed floor plan of Hampton's Chicago apartment. On the night of December 3rd, Hampton was drugged by that same informant. Early the next morning, a tactical unit made up of Chicago police officers working with the FBI raided the apartment. They fired nearly 100 shots. Hampton was asleep next to his pregnant fiancée and never woke up. He was shot in the head at point-blank range. No one was ever criminally charged for the killing. Joan of Arc. Joan of Arc is one of the most legendary figures in French history. At just 17, she led French troops into battle during the 100 Years' War, claiming divine guidance from visions of saints. But her rise was short-lived. In 1430, she was captured by the Burgundians, French allies of the English, and sold to the English forces. They didn't want to simply kill her, they wanted to discredit her, so they put her on trial for heresy. The charges were vague and stacked, wearing men's clothing, claiming to hear voices, and supposedly acting against the church. The trial was a political setup. It was conducted by pro-English clergy and violated several legal standards, even for the time. On May 30th, 1431, Joan of Arc was burned at the stake in the market square of Rouen, France. Witnesses said she asked for a cross and called out to Christ as she died. 25 years later, a retrial ordered by the Pope overturned the verdict, declaring her innocent and a few centuries later even a saint. Harvey Milk. Harvey Milk was the first openly gay man elected to public office in California. He pushed for equal rights ordinances, built coalitions with other marginalized groups, and made serious political waves in just 11 months in office. But not everyone was on board with the changes. Dan White, a former police officer and fellow supervisor, resigned from the board, then changed his mind and asked for his job back. When Mayor George Moscone refused to reinstate him, White took matters into his own hands. On November 27, 1978, White entered San Francisco City Hall through a basement window to avoid metal detectors. He brought a revolver. He shot and killed Mayor Moscone in his office, then walked down the hall and shot Harvey Milk 5 times, including twice in the head at close range. At trial, his lawyers argued he was mentally unstable, using nothing less than a junk food binge as evidence of depression, a defense that would later become known as the Twinkie defense. He was convicted of voluntary manslaughter instead of murder and sentenced to just under 8 years. He only served 5. Berta Cáceres. Born in Honduras, she co-founded the Council of Popular and Indigenous Organizations of Honduras and spent her life defending indigenous land rights. Her biggest battle? The Agua Zarca Dam. A private company planned to build it on sacred Lenca land without consent. Cáceres organized protests, filed legal complaints, and brought international attention to the situation. The pressure worked. Major investors started pulling out. But that didn't make her popular with the people who had money on the line. For years, she received death threats, stalking, and harassment. Then, on March 2, 2016, 2 gunmen broke into her home while she was sleeping and shot her. She died at the scene. An investigation eventually revealed that people linked to the dam company were behind the murder. Several were convicted, including hired ex-military personnel. Oscar Romero. Romero started out as a conservative Catholic archbishop, but in 1977, when his close friend, another priest, was assassinated for speaking out against government violence, Romero changed. He began using his position to publicly condemn the Salvadoran government, the military, and death squads for their human rights abuses. His sermons were broadcast on the radio and heard across the country. Every Sunday, he would name the week's victims, people who had been kidnapped, tortured, or killed. On March 24, 1980, Romero was celebrating Mass in a small hospital chapel. As he lifted the chalice during communion, a sniper entered and shot him through the heart. He collapsed behind the altar. His murder triggered international outrage and escalated El Salvador into full-blown civil war. Investigations later revealed the killer was connected to a far-right death squad. Anna Politkovskaya. Anna was a Russian journalist who covered the Chechen wars, exposed human rights violations, and wrote openly critical reports on Vladimir Putin's government and the military's abuses. In 2004, she was poisoned while traveling to cover the Beslan school hostage crisis. She survived, but it was a warning. Anna didn't stop. Then, on October 7, 2006, she was shot dead in the elevator of her apartment building in Moscow. It was Putin's birthday. That timing didn't go unnoticed. She received a shot to the heart, lungs, and head. Every shot was precise and would have been deadly. Her murder was clearly a professional hit. Patrice Lumumba. Patrice Lumumba was the first Prime Minister of the Democratic Republic of the Congo after its independence from Belgium in 1960. He was a powerful voice against colonialism, a charismatic speaker, and a serious threat to European control over Africa's resources, which, historically speaking, is not a safe combo. The CIA, Belgium, and local rivals all decided Lumumba was too dangerous to stay alive. So they made sure he wouldn't be. Lumumba was arrested by his political enemies, handed over to secessionist forces in Katanga, and on January 17, 1961, he was executed by firing squad. But it didn't end there. His body was chopped up and dissolved in acid to prevent any trace of him from becoming a martyr's symbol. One Belgian officer even kept one of Lumumba's teeth as a souvenir. It wasn't until decades later that Belgium admitted its role in his death. In 2022, they returned that single tooth to Congo for a state funeral, over 60 years after his assassination. John Brown. Not every activist was peaceful in his way. In the 1850s, as America was tearing itself apart over slavery, Brown believed violence was the only way to end it. He saw slavery not just as wrong, but as a sin that demanded immediate destruction. In 1859, he led a small group of followers, including several of his sons, on a raid of a federal armory at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. The plan was to seize weapons, spark a massive slave uprising, and overthrow the system from the inside. It failed, badly. Local militias and U.S. Marines stormed the armory. Brown was captured, wounded, and quickly put on trial for treason, murder, and inciting rebellion. On December 2, 1859, John Brown was executed by hanging. A year later, the Civil War began. Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in prison for opposing apartheid in South Africa. That's almost 3 decades behind bars, long enough for some of his jailers to retire while he was still in a cell. But eventually he came out of prison to become president of South Africa, win a Nobel Peace Prize, and dismantle a racist system that had ruled the country for generations. History also still sees him as one of the few revolutionaries who gained power without seeking revenge on the former oppressors. He died on December 5, 2013, at the age of 95, surrounded by family after a long illness. A wholesome death to end this video, filled with assassinations and conspiracies. Thanks for watching. See the video on your screen? Well, YouTube thinks this one might interest you as well, so go ahead and check it out if you like.